The palace of Xerxes was a monument to the greatness of his empire, a living work of art. Golden walls reflected the sun's brilliance, immaculate gardens exuded exotic aromas, and fountains poured crystal-clear water in an eternal spectacle. But to me, Vashti, Queen of Persia, that place was as much a fortress as it was a prison. It was the setting of a life adorned by jewels but entangled in invisible chains. As queen, I was admired and revered. The women of the court looked at me as an unattainable ideal, while the men respected me as the consort of the most powerful king in the world. But in moments of solitude, when silence took over my chambers, I would ask myself, who am I beyond the title I carry? Xerxes was a man of overwhelming presence, whose authority was unquestionable. Tall and imposing, with eyes that could pierce the soul, he ruled with a mix of charisma and rigidity. Our marriage, however, was a political alliance, a contract between power and status. To him, I was an essential piece in his game, but never an equal. My role was clear: to be graceful, to adorn the celebrations of the kingdom, and to reinforce the image of Xerxes' absolute power. I played this role with precision for years, moving through the palace halls like an elegant shadow. But behind the practiced smile and luxurious gowns, there was a flame that no one could extinguish: my dignity. This flame was small and discreet, but constant. It was the part of me that longed for something more, something that gold and glory could not offer. And although I didn't know it, this flame was about to be tested in a way that would change my life forever. In the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign, he organized a grand banquet to celebrate his conquests. For 7 days, the palace would be the center of the universe, gathering the nobles, officers, and most influential leaders of the empire. The event was more than a celebration, it was a demonstration of power. The main hall was transformed into a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, while finely embroidered carpets covered the marble floors. The tables were laden with exotic delicacies, rare fruits, meat spiced with seasonings brought from distant lands, and wines flowing like an endless river. Every detail was designed to display Xerxes' wealth and glory. While the men feasted in the main hall, the women, as was customary, were gathered in a separate space. My role was to be the hostess of this gathering, maintaining an atmosphere of lightness and grace. But that night, my heart was uneasy. I could hear the loud laughter and music coming from the main hall, a constant reminder that I was once again excluded from the true center of power. Then, a messenger entered the room where we were gathered. His expression was tense, and he hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply. "The king requests your presence in the main hall." A murmur ran through the room. I furrowed my brow, surprised. "Why?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. The messenger hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. "The king desires that your Majesty display her beauty before his guests." His words echoed in the air, heavy with weight. Display my beauty? It wasn't an invitation, but an order to become an object of display, a trophy to entertain drunken men. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of indignation. Why should my position, my worth, be reduced to that? I slowly stood, feeling the eyes of all the women around me. Some were shocked, others anxious. I knew my response would have consequences, but at that moment, there was only one choice I could make. "Tell the king," I replied, my voice firm, "that I will not go." The room fell into a deathly silence. My words were unimaginable, an act of disobedience that none of those present would dare perform. But inside me, I felt something unexpected: peace. For the first time, I had chosen to be true to myself, not the title I bore. I knew the storm would come, but at that moment, I was ready to face it. After my response, the messenger hesitated. His posture, once rigid, relaxed slightly, as if he felt the weight of my words. He lowered his head, gave a hasty bow, and left the room. The sound of his hurried footsteps echoed in the silence that filled the hall. The women around me stood still, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. One of them, a young woman with wide eyes and dark hair, approached hesitantly. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Your Majesty, are you sure you did the right thing? The king, he doesn't accept disobedience." I looked at her, noticing the genuine concern in her gaze. "What is right is not always easy," I replied, calmly but firmly. Had I given in, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror. There are moments when dignity is all we have. She backed away slowly, but her words continued to echo in my mind. I knew I had crossed a dangerous line. Xerxes' power was absolute, and challenging his authority was not only uncommon, it was unacceptable. Yet, even as fear tried to creep in, my conviction remained solid. I had chosen to defend something greater than my title, my dignity. When I retired to my chambers, the weight of my decision began to manifest. I sat before the mirror, observing my own reflection. My eyes were steady, but there was a slight tremor in my hands. "Are you ready for what's to come?" I asked myself in a murmur. There was no answer, only the silence of the room and the distant sound of the ongoing banquet. Hours passed until I heard footsteps in the corridor. The door opened, and a servant entered hastily. He seemed anxious, almost hesitant to meet my gaze. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply. "The king is furious. He has called the council to decide on your refusal." I nodded slowly, absorbing the news. "Thank you," I responded, my voice calm. When he withdrew, I turned toward the window. The night was clear, and the stars shone serenely. Despite the tension, I felt a strange peace. I knew I had done the right thing, even if it meant losing everything. In the throne room, the tension was palpable. Xerxes sat in his position of power, his eyes fixed on the counselors gathered before him. His expression was hard, but there was something more in his gaze, a shadow of frustration that few would notice. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a counselor adjusting their position or clearing their throat. "She challenged me," Xerxes finally declared, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Before all the most powerful men in my empire. This cannot be tolerated." One of the counselors, an elderly man with a gray beard, leaned slightly forward. "Majesty, Vashti's disobedience is an attack on the kingdom's order. If the queen can challenge the king, who else will feel encouraged to do the same?" Another, younger counselor, eager to impress, intervened. Deposing her would send a clear message that the king does not tolerate disrespect, no matter who is at fault. Xerxes listened attentively, but his face betrayed an internal conflict. He was not just angry, he was dealing with a blow to his pride. Perhaps, on some level, he recognized the courage in Vashti's act, but he could not allow this to be seen as weakness. "And what if I forgive her?" he asked, testing the waters. His voice was lower now, but carried the weight of his position. A tense silence followed before the older counselor responded cautiously. "Majesty, forgiveness could be seen as weakness. The kingdom needs to see that the king's authority is absolute, even over the queen." Xerxes remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on a distant point. Finally, he nodded, his expression hardening. "Very well," he said. "She will be deposed. Prepare the announcement for tomorrow." Meanwhile, in my chambers, the waiting seemed endless. I sat by the window, watching the starry sky, feeling the weight of a decision I knew had already been made. When the servant returned to deliver the news, his expression was grim. "Majesty," he began carefully, "the council has decided that your Majesty will be stripped of your position as queen." I nodded, rising slowly. "Very well," I responded, my voice calm but firm. "If that is the decision, I accept the consequences." The servant hesitated for a moment, perhaps expecting more from me. But I had nothing else to say. He withdrew, and I was left alone once more. I knew the next day would bring irreversible changes, but there was something no one could take from me, the certainty that I had made the right choice. The next morning arrived heavy with tension. The sun had barely risen, but the palace was already in motion. The corridors seemed colder, quieter, as I was escorted to the throne room. The guards by my side stood still, their faces rigid, as though they dared not show emotion. As I entered the hall, the air felt thick. All eyes were on me, counselors, courtiers, even servants. Xerxes sat on his golden throne, his expression hard and impenetrable. He didn't show anger, but the gravity of his posture spoke louder than any shout could. Vashti, he began, his voice resonating through the hall. You have challenged my authority before all the court. You have dishonored not only me, but the throne of Persia. Therefore, you can no longer bear the title of queen. His words fell like a sentence, echoing throughout the hall. I felt the eyes of all upon me, some curious, others stern. I kept my posture, refusing to show any weakness. I gave a brief curtsy, not out of submission, but as a final gesture of respect for the position I once held. Majesty, I responded, my voice calm but firm, I understand your decision and accept the consequences. But know that my dignity remains intact. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in Xerxes' eyes, doubt, perhaps even regret. But he quickly averted his gaze, turning to the counselors beside him. There was nothing more to say. I turned and left the hall, each of my steps echoing like a reminder that my journey there had come to an end. Back in my chambers, I began to pack my few belongings. A young servant entered, her eyes filled with tears. Majesty, she said, her voice choked, I can't believe this is happening. You were a just and strong queen. I placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small smile. The title of queen can be taken away, but who I am remains, I replied. Don't worry about me. Soon after, a simple carriage was prepared. The sound of the wheels on the gravel as I left the palace was the last sound I heard from that place. I didn't look back. My life there was over, but a new one was just beginning. The journey to my new home was silent, broken only by the sound of the carriage wheels and the singing of birds in the fields. The property where I was sent was simple, but welcoming. It was a small house surrounded by trees, with a garden that seemed to have been abandoned for some time. Though far from the luxury of the palace, there was something there that gave me an immediate sense of peace, freedom. The first days were challenging. Without servants to tend to the daily tasks, I had to learn to do things I had never done before: cook, clean, take care of the garden. At first, these tasks felt overwhelming, but soon I realized they connected me to life in a way the palace had never allowed. Every small act of caring for the house was a way of caring for myself. One morning, as I was planting flowers in the garden, I heard light footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a woman from the nearby village. She held a small basket of fruit and looked hesitant. Majesty, she began, bowing slightly, I'm sorry to disturb you. I heard your story and wanted to say that I admire your courage. I invited her to sit on a nearby bench, curious about what she had to say. Courage? I asked. Many would say what I did was reckless. She shook her head. To us, common women, it is courage. You said no when no one else would dare. That gives us hope that we too can be heard. Her words touched something deep within me. I hadn't thought that my decision could mean anything beyond a personal choice. But there she was, a common woman, saying that my story had planted a seed of strength. In the following days, other women began to appear. Each brought their stories, their pain, their dilemmas. Some came seeking advice, others simply to express gratitude. These interactions showed me that, even far from the throne, I still had something to offer: inspiration. That night, looking up at the stars, I reflected on what I had lost and what I had gained. My position as queen had been a symbol of power, but now I understood that true power came from within. And as long as I could inspire other women to find their strength, my story was far from over. The passing of days in the countryside brought a new perspective to my life. The silence that had once seemed so foreign became a refuge, and my routine, once filled with empty formalities, was now marked by small acts that brought renewed meaning. Each flower planted, each meal prepared with my own hands, felt like a step toward a simpler, but truer life. The visits from women in the village became a constant. Each brought with them stories that reminded me of my own struggle for dignity. Some came seeking advice, others simply to share their pain. In each conversation, I saw a reflection of myself, women facing challenges, trying to find their voice in a world that insisted on silencing them. One afternoon, an older woman came to me. Her hands were calloused, and her face bore the marks of a hard life, but her eyes shone with determination. "Majesty," she began, with a shy curtsy. "For many years, I accepted life as it is, thinking it was the only way. But, hearing about your courage, I began to wonder, what if I could also say no?" I invited her to sit with me in the garden, the scent of flowers filling the air. "And what would you say no to?" I asked gently. She sighed, as if carrying a weight for a long time. "My husband insists that I sell the small land my father left me. He says we have no choice, but that land is all that remains of my family. I want to fight for it, but I'm afraid." "What if you fight?" I asked, looking deeply into her eyes. "What if, for once, you decide that this choice is yours and no one else's? The fear will be there, but so will your strength." Her tears began to fall silently, but there was something in her posture that changed. She thanked me before leaving, and I knew her decision had been made. Moments like these showed me that, even in exile, my story continued to have an impact. Each woman who found courage in my example was a reminder that, though I had lost a crown, I had gained something much more valuable: purpose. One morning, while tending to the garden, an unexpected messenger arrived. It was a palace servant, a familiar face that seemed relieved to find me. He bowed deeply before speaking. "Majesty," he began, with a tone of respect that surprised me. "The king has chosen a new queen. Her name is Esther." For a moment, I stood in silence, absorbing the news. It was inevitable, I knew. Still, something in the name Esther seemed to carry a weight I couldn't define. "What do you know about her?" I asked, curious. "She is different," he replied, with a faint smile. "They say she is humble, but possesses a quiet strength. Many believe her presence on the throne will bring changes, perhaps even something grand." These words stayed with me long after he left. Esther. I didn't know her, but something in her description seemed to resonate with my own journey. Perhaps she too would face difficult choices, moments when she would need to defend her dignity, even against forces that tried to silence her. That night, I climbed to the top of the hill near my house. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of field flowers, and the sky was full of stars. I looked toward the horizon, where Xerxes' palace stood in the distance, still visible, its silhouette against the night sky. "Be strong, Esther," I murmured, as if I could send my thoughts to her. "May your light shine brighter than any crown. May you find the courage to face whatever comes." As I descended the hill, I felt a peace I had not known in a long time. My life as queen had ended, but my story continued. It wasn't about what I had lost, but about what I had gained: the freedom to be true to myself and the ability to inspire other women to do the same. My story was now connected to Esther's, a new queen who, perhaps, carried an even greater purpose. And with that certainty, I knew that, even far from the throne, I was still, in many ways, a queen. Ready to draw strength and wisdom from the extraordinary women of the Bible? Dive deeper into their virtues and discover how their timeless lessons can transform your life today. Our ebook, The Virtues of Women in the Bible, Timeless Lessons from Modern Life, is your guide to finding renewed courage, hope, and purpose. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the first pinned comment to get access now. Don't wait, let Hannah, Esther, Ruth, and Mary show you how to face life's challenges with unshakable faith and wisdom. Your journey to a brighter, more fulfilling future starts here.